Wealth Inequality in America, visualized for 2023. Hello guys! Welcome to our YouTube channel, Ash Cash Stash. Let the fierce reality of wealth inequality in America in 2023 serve as a call to action rather than a reason for hopelessness as we see it. Having a thorough understanding of the problem is the first step in making real change. We have the potential to build a more just society where everyone has access to opportunity and wealth. Together, we can create a better future where everyone, regardless of their circumstances or background, has an equal opportunity to succeed. In order to secure a more just and inclusive America, let this enlightenment push us ahead, spark debates, and motivate us to make the necessary reforms. Number 1. Unequal wealth distribution in the U.S. Participants in a recent survey were asked how they thought the wealth distribution in the United States was perceived. They were given 5 categories into which to split up American wealth, and they concluded that the top 20% held somewhat more than half of the country's wealth, while the poorest 20% held on a small amount, no more than 5%. Over 90% of respondents believe that they prefer a more equitable distribution of wealth, even if they acknowledge that the top 20% would still possess a sizable share. As a result, the true wealth distribution is considerably more skewed than they initially believed. Number 2. Americans continue to hold the same views on wealth distribution. It's startling to learn that Americans' views on wealth distribution haven't altered considerably over time. When asked to split a symbolic pumpkin pie symbolizing all American household wealth into parts, random mall sponsors regularly assigned the majority of it to the middle class, according to a recent example from 2020 on a CBS morning show. This confirms the preceding study findings, showing that many Americans continue to have an incorrect perception of how money is distributed in the country. Contrary to popular belief, the real distribution reveals that a significant percentage of the nation's wealth is held by top 20% of the population. In order to foster a more realistic understanding among the general public, there is a continuing need for education and discussion about economic inequality and wealth distribution. Number 3. Real wealth distribution. The growing inequality in the United States is clearly reflected in the way wealth is distributed in 2023. The data reveal an astonishing fact. The top 20 Americans own more than 80% of the entire wealth of the country. The wealth distribution chart hardly shows any difference between the bottom 20% and the next 20%, from the 21st to the 40th percentile. Surprisingly, just 5 to 6% of the population belongs to the middle class, which is frequently regarded as being more wealthy. The concentration of wealth at the peak is quite astonishing. Collectively, the richest 1% of Americans own more wealth than what the majority of people think the top 20% ought to own. One can refer to the original 2012 film, which cleverly condensed all 340 million Americans to a representative 100 people to better understand the scope of this inequity. With the poorest on the left and the richest on the right, each 10% representing a different percentile of wealth, this visual representation demonstrated the sharp inequality. It inspired crucial discussions about the need for equity and fairness in the community by illustrating the sharp truth of how wealth is concentrated within a small number of people in our society. Number 4. Update for 2023, examining 2012's wealth visualization. According to the American ideal of wealth distribution, the wealthiest own slightly more than the middle class, while the middle class keeps the majority of wealth. Poverty is not an important concern in this society, but the harsh reality is entirely different. According to recent Federal Reserve statistics, 37.9 million people, or 11.6% of the population, are now considered to be below the poverty level. A person is considered to be in poverty if their annual income is less than $12,760 US, or around $35 per day, for those under the age of 65. The richest people in this reality amass wealth that is incalculable and spreads well beyond the confines of the screen. And it is difficult to distinguish between the middle class and the poor. The wealth disparity between the richest 1% of Americans and the rest of the population is even more amazing. In the last 11 years, the vast wealth disparity has grown dramatically, underscoring the need for continued awareness and discussion about economic inequality in the United States. Number 5. Distribution of wealth in 2023. The pattern of wealth distribution in the US is amazing and worrisome. The top 1% of the population will control a staggering 31% of the country's wealth in 2023, or a staggering $43.94 trillion out of the $140 trillion in total wealth of the nation. To put it in perspective, each of these people has the net worth in excess of $11.1 million US. To visually portray their vast fortune, a separate column is required. Taking a broader view, the richest 10% of Americans jointly control 69% of the country's wealth, leaving the other 90% with just 31%, or a third, of the total. Due to this concentration of money, about 70% of it is held by a small number of people, showing the enormous wealth divide. The situation at the bottom of the wealth distribution is even more astounding, where the entire poorest 50% of the population owns just $3.4 trillion in value, or just 2.45% of the entire country's wealth. This is an improvement over 2012, when the poorest 50% controlled just 0.87% of the country's wealth. It is important to note, the substantial wealth gain at the top secrete this rise in the wealth proportion of the lower half of the population. Because the wealth gap has grown over time, it is essential to comprehend these shifts in inequality. Number 6. Wealth distribution, 1989 to 2012 to today. It's extremely interesting to see how money has been distributed in the US over the last few decades. In 1989, the wealth of the country was divided as follows. The top 1% owned 22% of it, the top 10 held 60% of it collectively, and the other 90% held 40%. By 2012, there had been a noticeable change, with the top 10% now owning close to 68% and the rest just holding 32%. This represented a widening wealth difference over the course of about 25 years, when the richest 10% saw an increase in wealth of 8% and a decline in wealth of 8% for the lowest 90%. By the year 2023, the difference had grown even more. The richest 10% currently a massive 69% of the country's total wealth, leaving the other 90% with just 31%. This demonstrates that the wealthiest 10% increased their share of wealth by 1% in just a decade, while the rest lost 1%. It's a depressing pattern that prompts critical inquiries about American economic disparity and its long-term consequences. Number 7. Inequality of wealth worldwide. A striking disparity can be seen between the wealth distribution in the United States and that of 28 other industrialized nations including Denmark, Germany, Canada, Japan, and Italy. The analysis shows that the wealth gap in the United States is greater than that of any of these countries. The richest 10% of the population would normally control roughly 52% of the total wealth in each of these countries on average. This is very dissimilar to the United States, where there is much bigger concentration of wealth at the top. The United States is clearly an abnormality on the graph, having the most significant wealth disparity. The United States continues to be at the extreme end of the scale, even though nations like the Netherlands and Denmark also exhibit significant disparity. Number 8. The book, quote-unquote, The Billionaire Phenomenon. The United States is unique on the international stage not just because of its economic might, but also because it has the most millionaires. According to Forbes, there are 735 billionaires who are publicly listed in the United States, followed by 698 billionaires in China and 237 billionaires in India. Germany and Russia, with 136 and 117 billionaires respectively, round out the top 5 nations. Consider this to put the sheer size of their riches into perspective. At the end of 2022, the 735 American billionaires had more than $4.5 trillion in assets. The collection wealth of bottom 50% of American households is greater than this amount. It's tough to imagine such levels of riches. The average net worth of a billionaire is about $6.1 billion. This amount is astoundingly 555 times more than someone who just entered the top 1% with a net worth of $11.1 million and 110,000 times greater than the net worth of a family in the bottom 50%. Number 9. The quote-unquote Elon Musk's wealth visualized. The huge gap between the wealth of regular Americans and people like Elon Musk is made abundantly clear in this thought-provoking visual illustration. The Oreo cookies and Toblerone chocolates, used as symbols of median wealth, highlight how enormous Musk's fortune actually is. You would need to stack Toblerone 7 times to the height of Mount Everest in order to equal Elon Musk's net worth, or arrange Oreo cookies in a straight line 3 times as far as the Grand Canyon. The $1 billion cube, which is 45 feet tall and displays Musk's huge riches, is impressive. The video emphasizes the value of subscribing to stay updated on personal finance and economic topics as we traverse the complexity of wealth and income inconsistency. It is all a call to action that encourages us to have discussions and look into potential answers to these urgent problems. Understanding the sharp facts of wealth distribution is the first step toward good change in a society where the American ideal endures alongside increasing inequality. This eye-opening exploration will ignite your passion for understanding the world around you, shedding light on issues that matter most. Subscribe now to be a part of a community that believes in knowledge as the catalyst for positive transformation. Join us as we dive deep into the heart of the matter, illuminating the sharp realities of wealth inequality in 2023 America.